Well, thank you everybody again for coming out for the John Wright Speaker Series for September. It's been a while since we were in person last. I believe it was March the last time we had an in-person speaker series. So I wanted to give a couple of updates on what's been going on at SRA since then. I'll keep it very brief. But one of the things that I'm really excited about is we got a grant a while ago to develop a Severn River Action Plan, which is our restoration strategy for the coming years. And that was finalized as of last month. And we are now starting to target projects in the Weems Creek watershed, which was the #1 priority for restoration. That was a project a long time in the making, so we're happy to have that done. Earlier this month, we received a Tier 3 accreditation from the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative for our scientific monitoring program. That's the highest tier of data integrity that the citizen science organizations like ours get throughout the Bay. So that's good. That means that our water quality data can be used to underlie regulatory and resource management decisions. On August 20th, we planted 12.5 million oysters in the river, thanks to the generosity of the donors who contributed to the Green Give campaign in June. So that's another nice highlight of the summer. And we got a grant last month also for a little bit over $116,000 to do more targeted restoration work in the headwaters in the Picture Spring branch area in Odenton. And we also got funding again this year to do our youth education program next year, where we'll be diversifying from a boat-based education program to doing boats and forest education for kids, mostly from Annapolis, but also from further afield. So all that possible thanks to the support of our members. Thank you all for taking care of us here at SRA. And without any further ado, I'll hand it off to our board member, Brian Gomes, to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Jesse. Before I start, can I have any current or former board members for the Severn River Association stand for a minute and say hello so people know who you are and we can connect faces with our folks here? Yeah, anyone that is a current or former board member, thank you for being here and thank you for all you've done presently and in the past. Okay, Adam Ortiz has served as the EPA's Mid-Atlantic Regional Administrator since November 2021. In his role, he oversees federal environmental and public health protections in Delaware, where I was 2 hours ago, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia, and 7 federally recognized tribes. Prior to joining the senior leadership team at EPA, Adam was the director of Montgomery County, Maryland's Department of Environmental Protection and the director of Department of Environment for Prince George's County, Maryland, and a 3-term mayor of the town of Edmonston, Maryland. What county is that? Prince George. As mayor, Adam ended years of chronic flooding through water infrastructure improvements, spearheaded the East Coast's first complete green street that successfully captured and filtered stormwater runoff, enabled bike and pedestrian access, and improved the quality of life of the town's diverse residents. One thing you won't see on Adam's EPA bio is that he also sings and plays guitar for the indie rock band Blue Plains, based out of Washington, D.C. And if you happen to their website, this is my favorite sentence from the bio. We have hundreds of influences, but we sound like Blue Plains more than anything else. It's my great honor to introduce mayor and singer of Blue Plains, and sometimes at the EPA. Thank you, Brian.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here and spend time with you. Some of you I've known for a while, and thank you again, Brian, for that kind introduction. And Jesse, who's been a longtime friend, and I've been a friend and supporter of him and his very activist family, doing a lot of things often unseen or unappreciated to make life better in Maryland. So I'm just grateful to continue to work with Jesse in new roles, a new role for him than from when I first met him years ago, a new role for me as well. And, it's all connected. What I often say is that over time, we have, different roles in public service and serving the public good, whether it's an NGO or in government, but we're still on the same team. We're still on the same team. We're still on team environment together. And all of you in this room, and I want to thank each and every one of you for whatever role that you've had or that you currently have, and just keeping an eye on things, making sure that organizations that deserve support get support, that we're accountable for making progress, and that we try to leave this place a little bit better off than where we found it. So whether you're a volunteer or you have oysters off your dock, or whether you're a donor, or whether you just give Jesse a hard time every month, just thank you, because we're all in this together, in different roles over time, but it all really matters. But I'm really pleased to be here. I live in Hyattsville, Prince George's County, which isn't too far away. It's about 35-40 minutes. And I spend a lot of time going throughout the region, and I'll talk a little bit about that and what we're up to at EPA. But it's really, really great to come back to my home base and my home watershed here in the Bay and in Maryland, because there's so much good stuff that has happened here. And the work that all of us have done together as a community over these recent decades has really shown the way, not just for other watersheds in the Mid-Atlantic, but around the country and around the world. And Don Bosch will tell you that we get delegations from China, from Singapore, from all over the place. Like, how did you guys do this? And how do you, make this progress? And how do you not fight all the time? And we tell them, no, actually, we do fight all the time. But we're still have our eyes on the prize, still trying to get things done. So it's an important part of my personal and professional life to come from this community. A different sub-watershed, perhaps Anacostia watershed, but we're all listening and learning and making progress together. I want to just cover a few things tonight in sharing notes. I want to talk a little bit about what we've been up to at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Biden-Harris administration to advance and accelerate restoration and conservation. I also want to share some notes about where things are today and how things are looking, now, and then look forward a little bit about what we anticipate to be in the future. So as Brian said, my background is mostly in local government, little town of Evanston, Prince George's County in Montgomery County, and I was in charge of the stormwater programs, principally, among other things, solid waste and animal management and a variety of other things, but really, nuts and bolts, everyday stuff in local government, picking up the trash and the recycling and making sure it's processed, in charge of the MS4 permits, which is, how we control stormwater and impervious surfaces. And just always my focus, it goes back to those town hall meetings when I was mayor. It's like rooms like this, like, how do I explain what I've done today or what our team has done to the taxpayers, to the residents, to the people who are invested? Everything we do, I always felt I had to justify it in plain language and talk about the progress we're making, or if we're not making progress, which happens, to be transparent about why. We tried something, it didn't work, or we don't have the staffing yet, or the funding, or there's a legal reason, but that there's this instant accountability for everything that has to be done. And I was really lucky to have that background, because we did hundreds of stormwater projects in Prince George's County, and we're able to get 80% of a $200 million construction portfolio going to small, local, and minority businesses. We were able to get stuff done and accelerate, and it wasn't always perfect, but at the end of the day, I was like, did we get that project in the ground? Did we control the stormwater from that shopping center? Did we provide co-benefits and make the neighborhood more beautiful? Because people have to live every day with the work that we do. Like that level of accountability was the standard we held ourselves to. And it's like picking up the trash. I've been in charge of picking up the trash for 15 years of my career. Not the most glamorous job, but at the end of the day, did people's trash get picked up? If we missed their place, did we go back and get it? So that level of accountability and transparency is something that's been important to me in this job. So I've been in this job for almost 3 years. I'm an appointee in the Biden-Harris administration. I got this job just transparently because there was frustration among the community here that the regional administrator for the Mid-Atlantic has never come from the state of Maryland or Virginia for that matter. Crazy. Crazy. And well, after my term, they're gonna be like, no more Marylanders. Like, cut it off, we're done. There's a little bit of a geographic bias because the office is in Philadelphia, which is in, way up there in the corner of the region. It goes all the way down to the Carolina border, goes all the way to Ohio River in West Virginia. So it's way up there. So naturally, the people who are crazy enough to take this job usually live within a 30-minute commute, whether they're in Wilmington or greater Philadelphia area. So it's been a tough job to fill for a Marylander, but folks were really frustrated because they didn't feel like the Bay effort was accelerating that that EPA was doing its job. So they really wanted a Marylander. So I was at first when I was they suggested the job to me, and it was Secretary John Griffin, who many of us know. John was like, "Hey, your name has been floated. Do you want this job?" I was very familiar with EPA Region 3 and regional administrators. My answer was like, no, that's a terrible idea. What a terrible idea, and I would work for Montgomery County, it was a good place to work, very supportive place. But the more I thought about it, and, John was a great friend and mentor and others, they were like, you should really consider this. This is a really important time in our work. And, you're going to bring a perspective and represent us downstream here in Maryland in ways that has not happened before in Philadelphia. So I thought about it more and I agreed to put my name in it and get the job. So thankfully, I did get the job. It's a long commute from the New Carrollton Metro Station, the Amtrak station, the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, but I made it work so far. But taking the role, I felt, I have a lot of responsibility here. The job, of course, it has a lot of responsibility. The regional administrator is in charge of overseeing the execution of Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and lots of legislation that we delegate sometimes to the states, but still have to hold them accountable. And then there's educational programs and voluntary agreements, like the Chesapeake Bay and other regional things that require persuasion, pressure, partnership, and then also this grant making piece. So there's all that. All of us have had tough jobs or responsible jobs professionally or personally in our lives. But this one I took also knowing that, gosh, I have to kind of correct the balance here or the imbalance in this region that downstream has often been forgotten in the Chesapeake watershed. So I got that very acutely, and Senator Cardin, who is one of my sponsors for the job, reminded me often, and actually I saw him this afternoon, and he was like, I hope you're spending time in Maryland and not always Pennsylvania. And I'm like, yes, sir, I'm spending time. I'm going to see Don Bosch and Jeff the Island, this afternoon. If you want to come, I'll give you a ride. It's spending time here, but there was a lot of pressure to, sort of correct what folks perceived as an imbalance in myself as well. We know with stakeholders I come, home to all the time. So I got the job in November of 2021. We were coming out of COVID yet again, and we were beginning to fill my calendar with, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to be, and I said I want my first in-person meeting to be with the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau.
Yeah.
That I was like, I want that to be our first meeting, my first meeting. And at the time, to just set the context, EPA was being sued by many states, many nonprofit organizations, CBF, maybe some of you, maybe you were part of this law. It felt like everybody was part of this lawsuit. And the plaintiff's position was like, EPA is not doing enough. You're not executing your full powers in your role, and Pennsylvania is falling behind, and as a result, the Bay effort is falling behind. So I wanted to get into that, and I had a lot of feelings about it because as a local guy, I passed the stormwater fees in my county. Like, remember how explosive that was and politically charged. So I went to hundreds of meetings, talking about the fee. I, fought and eventually befriended churches that wanted to not pay the fee. But I was like, hey, you churches, especially in Prince George's County, a lot of mega churches, you've got big parking lots, you've got big churches, big sanctuaries, big roofs. You're part of the stormwater problem and you need to be part of the stormwater solution. So like these tough things that we got through and it worked out, but it was tough. So I was kind of angry that in Maryland, we've done all these hard things. And then there's these other states that aren't stepping up with the same vigor, same fire in the belly. And I felt all of us have, right? We've done tough things. We've had arguments with our neighbors sometimes, or our legislators, to make the progress that we had. So, so having that, I was like, I want to get into this. I want to figure out Pennsylvania. I want to help get them on board. So that was my first meeting. That was, I think, December 2nd. So about a month since when I started. And again, we were just coming back to in-person meetings and all that stuff. And myself and our agriculture advisor, Kelly Shank, who some of you know, she lives in Annapolis and worked in the Bay program for a long time. She and I and some members of our team drove up 83 Harrisburg and met with the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. And I didn't know much about them. Kelly's been working with farms and agricultural stakeholders for a long time. So she knew most of the folks in the room. But I went there, it was weird. It's in another state. I like farms, but I don't know a lot of farmers, and here I was in the headquarters of the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. And we were in their conference room, wood paneled conference room. Not the nice wood paneling, sort of the cheap stuff from the 70s that was staple. I'm not judging. It was just like, just want to set the context for you. So we were there and did the introductions. And when it came to me, I was like, hey, I'm Adam Ortiz. I'm new in this role. I'm a Marylander in this job. And, I'm in a tough spot. I'm in this role. I'm inheriting a lawsuit where all these downstream states are suing us because of Pennsylvania. And, I want to figure it out. I want to find a way to partner with agriculture, with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and make progress together. And I'm also going to be transparent with you. I'm going to step up enforcement of farms, of wastewater treatment facilities in Pennsylvania. I just want to give you a heads up. That's inevitable. That's coming. But I want us to work it out. I want us to figure out how to make progress. So I gave that little 4-minute speech. And then the president of the Farm Bureau spoke next, Rick Ebert. He was sitting to my left at the head of the big conference table. And he said, Adam, we want exactly what you want. And that was not what I was expecting to hear. And he went on to say that, farmers are the first conservationists, that we have our hands in the soil all the time. He said, I am the co-founder of the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. And he talked about how he and others in the room, were basically part of this sustainable farming movement that really kind of took off in the 80s and early 90s that I wasn't even aware of because I'm just an ignorant suburban guy from my background. So he was just describing, we're trying to do what we can, but we'd like a little bit of partnership, and we're not, getting the support all the time that we deserve. And so we had a discussion about that, and I was like, okay, let's do it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do next? How do we make progress? Then sitting to my right was their government affairs specialist. He was the guy who goes to the legislature and tries to get funding, tries to get support for things, tries to stop, what they think are bad bills and, all that stuff. And he said that for 15 years, farmers have been trying to pass an agricultural conservation cost share program without any success. And I was like, okay, well, tell me more about that. He said, well, Maryland has had a cost share program since the 90s, Don, or along with a whole suite of programs that, Governor Hughes and Governor Glendening and Art O'Malley put in place. And he was like, you guys downstream have all these programs to help farmers, but we don't have those here. We haven't gotten the support from the governor. We haven't gotten the support from the legislature. And we watch what you do in Maryland, but we don't have that kind of support here. And that was interesting to me. I didn't know that. And then we talked more and we kind of unpacked all this stuff that as a Marylander, I just didn't know about Pennsylvania. So, Pennsylvania is it's a very complex state politically. Maryland, there's sort of central Maryland, DC suburbs, and Baltimore and Howard County and Arundel, and you kind of get on the same page among those counties, and you're good. But in Pennsylvania, I was talking to Lou, my colleague, there's like 6 states in Pennsylvania. There's like Philadelphia, which is, a classic American iconic city. Then there's sort of the northeastern older cities like Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Allentown, very different politics, very different histories. Then in the west, go to the west, you have Erie, which a lot of people forget, old industrial, city. Pittsburgh, of course, in Allegheny County. And those are 2 political centers that are 6-hour, 5-hour drive from each other. So there's not a lot of coordination. Philadelphia in the east is in the Delaware watershed. Allegheny County, Pittsburgh is in the Ohio River watershed, which goes to the Gulf of Mexico. Like totally different environmental experiences. So I mentioned 2 watersheds, and one of them that I did not mention is the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is in the middle, almost entirely rural. There's some small to mid-sized cities in the middle, but for the most part, it's extremely rural, not a lot of political power there. So, people might be fired up about the Bay, but they might represent 20% at best on a good day of the legislature. So, there just wasn't that much attention to it. And, on top of that, they're upstream. So talking about the Bay, many of them have never been to the Bay, or it was a class trip or something, in high school. So they don't have a lot of connection. So there's these dynamics that are much more complex. Another one on top of that is, so Pennsylvania, as not the oldest state in the Union, but one of the oldest states in the Union, was Quakers, Pennsylvania Dutch, history of small farmers, sort of like New England, tiny farms, 100 acres, 60 acres, 40 acres, all across the state. There's not industrial agriculture for the most part in Pennsylvania. So I might have this number wrong, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of 50,000 farms in the Commonwealth. 50,000 farms. I think Maryland has 8,000 farms, 12,000, 11,000 farms. So totally different scale. And the small farmers are tougher to regulate. So, so EPA has authority only over large operations, over CAFOs, if you've heard that term before, concentrated animal feeding operations, big volumes, industrial, like 1,000 head of cattle or 1,000 hogs. Like that's what we have authority over. Anything less than that, if the state has regulations, it's up to the state, or whether it's the environmental department or the Department of Agriculture, but we do not have direct authority over those smaller operations. Those smaller operations of that 50,000 constitute 98% of the farms in Pennsylvania. So we had no regulatory trigger to get to these smaller farms. And the smaller farms are just what you'd imagine, like family farms, often intergenerational, sometimes going back the colonial era, but sometimes, fairly recent. And small farms that, families are working. They're up at 5 o'clock, like literally milking the cows at 5 or 6 in the morning, working through the weekends, working throughout the year. They don't have, their company does not provide them health insurance or retirement plans. So there's all these stresses on a small family farm, as you'd imagine. So I don't want to belabor that point, but it's a very different dynamic. And so, going back to that conference room with Rick Ebert and the lobbyist, they were like, our farmers just need more help. They're by and large well-intentioned, and it's just like any other sector. Like, I think 80% of any sector or more is well-intentioned. Not everybody does all the right things, but they kind of want to do the right thing. And that was true with farmers. They're like, hey, our farmers want to do the right thing, but how are they to put a manure control, a concrete manure control in a heavy use area where the cows are, and that's where the cows poop, and that's where it might wash into the stream. Like, that's where you got to control it. That's a concrete infrastructure, highly engineered. That's a minimum of $70,000 investment. Minimum of $70,000 investment for a small farm. And it goes up from there. And so they were like, hey, how is a small farmer going to take that risk with fertilizer prices going up, feed prices going up, markets being insecure, milk consumption, these are dairy operations, milk consumption going down as people drink oat milk, almond milk, flax milk, all that stuff. So, as a Marylander, suburban Marylander, I was like learning a lot in this conference room. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I was like, okay, let's work together. Let's figure this out. So they said, well, we would love your support for a cost share program. We would love to get support, from the governor's office and from the legislators, and that would be a big step forward. And EPA can't lobby a state government or an entity. We can't lobby local governments, but we can educate about best practices. Or we can talk about shortfalls or shortcomings in the Bay Agreement, or so I committed to do that with them. And so it was myself, Ann Swanson, who some of you know, Ann Swanson, who's the director of the Bay Commission, kind of laid some of the political groundwork in this very Republican center part of the state of Pennsylvania, member of the Maryland Appropriations Committee. I think I'm not sure if she was the chair, but you might have heard of Sarah Elfreth. Oh, I know she's in this. Yeah. Budget and tax. That's right. Budget tax. Forgive me.
But she's going to be our congresswoman.
Can you say it again, Don? So Sarah, as like an activist and a legislator and very committed to the Bay, she and I did like shuttle diplomacy to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for months and months and months. Sarah brought the perspective of being an appropriator, in charge of financing, conservation, among other things here in the state in this leadership role. And, she was very acutely familiar with the role of Pennsylvania in the, Susquehanna River watershed, that goes into the top part of the main stem of the Bay. And then myself, trying to resolve this lawsuit and to try to get the states back together. So we went up there a lot, and we didn't go together. We went kind of divided and conquered, like, oh, you talked to Chairman so-and-so, I'm going to talk to him next week. What did he say? What's his concern? Da, 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 da. So we shared a lot of notes to try to be effective. And I probably lobbied, educated Harrisburg legislators as much as I've ever educated Annapolis legislators, just on like, hey, this is where Pennsylvania is. This is where the other states are. These are the best practices. What can you do? So, long story short, it worked. In 2022, they passed the first ever ACAP, the Agricultural Conservation Assistance Program, which set up the program to help small farms. And then they funded it with $160 million for their first investment. And that was a big step. It's not you know, got many steps to take, you know, it's a long journey, but that was a big step.
Where'd that money come from?
It came from ARPA. It was federal money that we gave COVID relief money to the state. I'm gonna build a story, like, so then there was critiques like, oh, well, Pennsylvania taxpayers didn't, it was like, well, this is still Pennsylvania money, it's everybody's money. But they funded it. And it was the Department of Agriculture for the state was in charge of programming it to figure out which farms it was to go to and to see. And by October, so this passed in July, by October, all the money was committed. They were oversubscribed like that because there was such demand from farmers. You know, that was interesting to me. You know, that was not my stereotype, you know, of them. So, you know, I continued to learn along with others. So there were other things they passed, like fertilizer control. They did a series of agriculture conservation bills in this legislature led by Republicans. So interesting, right? Which is great. You know, that's what we want. So continuing to go up there and, you know, we're trying to get more compliance with small farms, you know, non-point sources, you know, stormwater and farms are the toughest thing. Because they're all over the place. There's lots of small property owners, lots of small farmers. So, you know, my team and I, we were like, okay, how do we get more of a multiplier effect to get more of these 50,000 farms on board doing conservation? So, you know, there's that, you know, this conservation funding, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So that's good, but still, that just the sheer scale of the farms is daunting. So we brainstormed a few things. So the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau promised and committed to be a partner in educating their farmers, and in their newsletters, they talk about the conservation programs and the importance of conservation. Myself and the president of the Farm Bureau regularly talk to the there's a farm publication called the Lancaster Farmer that everybody reads in Pennsylvania if you're a farmer. So we regularly, you know, educate farmers through that as well. But I was like, you know, we still have to get further. So then we learned about Turkey Hill ice cream. Who's familiar with Turkey Hill ice cream? All right, enthusiastic. That wasn't just a raised hand, it was a fist pump for Turkey Hill ice cream. So other than tasting great, what's great about Turkey Hill ice cream? Does anybody know in terms of the bag? They are happier cows. So 7 years ago, I think, Turkey Hill committed to a bay-friendly supply chain for their dairy. Folks don't know about this. And Turkey Hill is located in it is actually Turkey Hill. Yeah, it's near Hanover, I think. Anyways, it's up there in the heart of the watershed, upstream watershed. So they committed to doing this, and it kind of like came and went. People didn't really pay attention. And I was like, that's a freaking great model, because what Turkey Hill does is they work with their farmers and help their farmers pay for conservation on their small farms. So it's not a government funding stream necessarily, but that's a corporate funding stream for these farms.
Conestoga.
Thank you. Yes.
That's it.
Conestoga. So the Conestoga River actually flows into Susquehanna, and that's near Lancaster, actually.
They'll be open at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Great tour.
It
I've
is.
taken the tour.
Hill experience. The
It-
Turkey Hill experience.
It's, thank you. Yeah, it's awesome. So I was like, how do we do more of that? So we met with the CEO, he recently retired, John Cox. And it was like, hey, John, man, how do we do what you do with other companies? And the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, is anybody familiar with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay? So they were the ones that actually brokered this agreement with Turkey Hill years ago. And so we all met and we're like, how do we do more of this? Because these corporations can get to hundreds and hundreds and thousands of little farms that EPA couldn't get to, or the state couldn't get to. So we brainstormed, you know, some companies that we were going to engage. And
What inspired them to build that program?
The CEO was really bought in. The CEO, John, was a huge conservationist and never kind of knew it was important, but didn't quite connect the dots. So he made the commitment to his board and very successful. So we thought of, well, what other iconic companies are in Pennsylvania? Hershey's. So the next company we went to was Hershey. And that's another great tour, by the way.
It is.
Take the Hershey tour. Also, just have a meeting at the Hershey headquarters, because literally in every single conference room, there's a bowl of candy bars. Like, that's a true story. Like, every single conference room, bowl of candy bars. So, so we met with them and we we're like, hey, this is what Turkey Hill did. And, you know, we would love for you're an iconic company. You would really set an example. And so the interesting thing about Hershey, it was founded by Milton Hershey. And he chose to locate where he did. It wasn't called Hershey, Pennsylvania before he located there. But Hershey, because he wanted to be in the heart of Pennsylvania's dairy shed, because it was such a productive part of the country in terms of dairy. These were family farms, so, you know, rock solid suppliers. So they sourced from a 90-mile radius from Hershey. So we approached them. We were like, hey, you're perfect. You're perfect for this. And it took 18 months of going back and forth. They weren't resistant, but they have a big, you know, they're Fortune 500 company probably. And, you know, board of directors that are, you know, pretty hard line. But eventually they said yes. They said yes. And what the vice president told me, he was like, we're doing this because we have a climate commitment, but also customers want a clean product that they're proud of, that they're proud to buy, that they're proud to consume. So Hershey came on board. Then Land O'Lakes came on board. Land O'Lakes, butter, obviously, but they also do a lot of supply chain for other products in the dairy shed. So we got them. And also, it's not totally public yet, so shh, everybody, especially online, Starbucks will be coming on board as well. That's lots of lattes. Yes, sir.
So I think you partially answered the question, but going back to the question before mine about how they justify their board and their shareholders. I mean, Turkey Hill is a private company, so that's a little easier, right? But when you have shareholders, I know you run into complications when you try to do good, so to speak. And so it sounds like their primary justification is that the branding issue for their customers, that they would appreciate the environmentally friendly or green message. Or were there any other justifications beyond that you can go?
The best entree that we had is that they had already made a climate commitment. So that the board of directors had already signed off on I think it was zero, I don't want to misquote it, but on an aggressive climate commitment. So at first they were like, well, do any of these conservation practices impact climate? And we were like, well, yes, not all of them do, but many of them do. So that's how we started. So we actually literally had a Venn diagram, climate practices, and then, you know, clean water control ag practices, and then the ones like literally in the middle of the Venn diagram were the ones we started with. So we got them on board with that. And once they committed to that, they agreed to expand it to other water conservation, but a big emphasis on trees, on riparian buffers and things that were sort of safe, but safely in the Venn diagram. You know, but just fascinating. So, so in each of these cases, at different proportions, these companies are matching our dollars or state dollars. So we're leveraging up, and we're going to continue to expand the corporate partnership piece. And again, this gets to networks of farmers that otherwise we wouldn't get to.
What about Rolling Rock or Union?
Is there any dairy in Yingling?
No, I'm just quoting other Pennsylvania corporations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's ag with the barley, right?
No, totally, absolutely. Cover crops, and I don't know if they're on the list. We've been
Yeah.
focusing mostly on dairy for now, but those are good. I want those tours. Do you want to come with me, Brian? Another story. But Pennsylvania with its ag history is headquarters to a lot of companies. So I hope I'm not belaboring, but these are like sort of notes and successes that aren't really in the paper that do make a big difference here downstream. Yes.
How did you interact with the Amish community around Lancaster?
Thank you. Great question.
You're welcome. Now, start talking.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so put it in context, I'm gonna get it wrong, but Maryland has a little more like 11,000 farms, I think, 12,000 farms, something like that. Don't quote me. Lancaster has 5,100 farms just in one county. Half of them are Amish or Mennonite, plain sect. So not on the internet, don't drive vehicles, all that stuff. So they have a big impact because Lancaster is sort of the hotspot of several in upstream nutrient loading. So actually I asked the Republican state senator from Lancaster, how do we work with the Amish? And he said, Bishop Byler. So the Amish, like in most faith organizations, have a hierarchy, and there are bishops, and then there's sort of a steering committee, a sort of board of directors, and they provide instruction and guidance for the different parishes, basically communities of churches. And a certain number of families are in a church, and a certain number of churches create a parish, and they're basically in this hierarchy. So so it took 4 months to get a meeting with Bishop Byler because he doesn't have a phone. Right, exactly. But sure enough, we were able to set up the meeting, and it was in the basement of his house, where he actually had a lot of it. That's where a lot of business took place for the Amish community. And I met with him and another member of what's called the steering committee, which is sort of the board in Pennsylvania. And they got sort of pre-briefed by the land conservation or soil conservation director for Lancaster. So he knew what we were going to talk about. We sat down, it was very friendly, very pleasant. And what was fascinating was that Mr. Byler knew everything about Chesapeake Bay. And he talked about some partnership program that they had done in 2011, focusing on a small watershed called Watkins Run, where they educated the farmers. And so it was just like the Farm Bureau. It's like, wow, these guys really get it. So anyway, long story short, we've been working with him and other leaders to get the word that farmers should be proactive in getting conservation dollars because they're inhibited from working with the government. So we passed money to the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay and other nonprofit organizations that now make the farmers more comfortable in receiving conservation money from the government. That was a long-winded answer, but that's the story. So we're working on it, and it's interesting. So we've had more inspections. I mentioned earlier, more enforcement and inspections. Of all sectors, we didn't want to just pick on farmers. We're also doing wastewater treatment plants in towns and cities, but we do have farms. And the ones that we have the most legal cover for doing for small farms, I said we can do big farms, but we can do small farms if it's an interstate issue, right? So they're all on the border of Maryland. And it just turns out that most of the farms on the border are Amish farms.
Yeah.
So it's been a little bit of a cultural challenge. And we had one farmer, Amish farmer, who wouldn't let us on his property. And we could have gotten a warrant to go on his farm. But just think of the optics of that, of the federal government getting a warrant to go on a small Amish farmer's farm. So I was like, do not do that. Let's just, take a little breath here, team. And we reached out to Bishop Byler. And then he talked to another guy, he talked to his family, and eventually the farmer let us on. So That's a lot of minutia. It's more than you bargained for tonight, but just to kind of give you an idea of this, of just trying to break through Pennsylvania. There's big stuff, the big conservation funding. They have new laws, more accountability, our pressure, also more grant making. Our grant making has more than quadrupled in recent years, in the recent 2 years to step it up. So a couple other things, and then I know folks might have questions. So a couple other things, back to the funding. So the 160 million that they committed goes until the end of 2025. But as a political appointee, my expiration date could be November 2024. So I really was committed to getting Pennsylvania locked into a longer term commitment. It wasn't just me, but the Republicans who passed the first laws wanted to as well. So there was pressure to just wait until 2025 to try to get the money. But at the end of their last session, with this last July, they were successful in getting a continual $50 million every year into the program. So I give credit to them. This was Senator Gene Yaw. His district is up near the New York border, so very far away from the Chesapeake Bay. But his commitment was to local watersheds and doing his part downstream. So it's really interesting. So that's a lot of note sharing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the present. Right now, no more lawsuits, at least not on the Chesapeake Bay. The states are all working together very well. We have a good rapport. We have a good rapport with the advocacy organizations from, Chesapeake Bay Foundation to, you name it, all of them. We don't always agree on everything, but we're at the table, always in conversation and working things out. And we have a regular call with the water keepers as well, just to share notes and take feedback on things. We're in the process now to look beyond 2025. We knew that we were not going to meet all the goals. We've met 18 of the 31 milestones, so that's great. But there's things that we have to work on more. So there's a draft out for our Beyond 2025 plan that will go to the Executive Council, which is the council that's headed by the big bosses, so the governors and the administrator of the EPA. So they're going to receive that report later this fall, and then we're going to take the following year to find the new metrics. Some of the things that are changing a little bit is, we're committed to the successes that we've seen in smaller watersheds, interdisciplinary work. So I'm in the Anacostia watershed. SAVs are back. Mussels that we thought were long gone are there. People are recreating. Yes.
I just said, well.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Wow. The muscles are back.
Mussels are back. And people are there. When I first moved to the area around the year 2000, Anacostia was where people threw bodies, and that was the reputation that had. That's not entirely untrue, but it was a place that people avoided. There was 3 landfills, there was a power plant, there's PCBs, it's just like all the bad stuff was on the east side of the city. But now there's like thousands of people on the river every day. There's crews from George Washington and American University. Like, it's just like so much good stuff happening.
Are people swimming in there?
Almost. So we had 2 swim days scheduled, and then it rained like the few days before. So so almost getting there. I could go on and on. I have 2 members of our team. I just wanted to give them a quick chance to introduce themselves and just like 2 minutes on what you're working on. So Listen to Power heads our partnerships and accountability branch. She's here in Annapolis, or there in Annapolis down the road. Lucinda, do you want to just share a few notes on 2025 and what you're working on? I'm going to hand you the microphone. And then I'm going to invite Lee Robinson to talk a little bit from the science and monitoring piece, which I know you're all very interested in.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Lucinda Power. I've been with the Bay program since 2010, but I'm born and bred in Maryland and absolutely love this watershed. So it's been sort of a dream job to land at the Bay program office. I'm an anthropologist by training, so I never thought I would work for the federal government. It just sort of happened serendipitously, and I'm really glad that it did. And my branch is really about people. Obviously, we have metrics and milestones that we have to meet, many of which are by 2025, but our mission within the branch is, what do people need in order to be successful? How can we set the partnership up for success? So not just bean counting, but making sure that we have the financial capital, the people at the table, both at the federal, regional, local level, where much of the work actually gets done. And how can we bring people along the way in meeting our goals? And as Adam had referenced, we're revisiting the watershed agreement, and that is our guidepost of the work that we do. We're not creating a new agreement. It doesn't expire, but we're really looking at it with a finer lens of, where does the partnership most add value to meeting these goals and outcomes? What can we accomplish together versus at an individual state level? That might be a state legal responsibility. And really, again, trying to work collectively better together as a partnership. I think Adam mentioned earlier in his remarks, it's not easy. There can be a lot of tension. We operate by consensus, and it's a very dynamic, diverse watershed. So bringing people to the table, often with differing agendas, it's a challenge, but working one-on-one or behind the scenes has made a real difference. Coming tonight, speaking with associations like this one, I think can make a real difference. Again, because you all are eyes and ears to the ground. You've been working in this field for many years. It's really important that the Bay office learn from you all about what's working well, what could be improved. And as mentioned, we're really focusing on beyond 2025. So what does the watershed agreement look like in this new era? We know it can't go back to what it looked like in the 1940s or 50s. It's just, with climate change, population on the rise, it's going to be different. We can't go back. But how can we work better together going forward? And that's a real focus of the partnership right now. There's going to be a lot of change, and change is really uncomfortable, but we have a vast array of committed partners at the table that we're really grateful for. And so that's sort of the focus of the partnership, but of my branch in particular, is making sure that we have the resources along the way to help get the job done, but also reimagine what the program could be working on in the future. So thanks for the and thank you for having us. And colleague Lou Leaker.
Folks, Lou Lincoln. I work with the science branch of the Bay program. And science in the Bay program could, I think, best be described as a three-legged stool. We have monitoring. Where are we now? We have modeling. Where do we have to go? And we also have the research, things going on in laboratories or field studies. And that three-legged stool has served us well as we advance the science and we advance our understanding and management in the Bay. Now, last time we used that stool, we had for the first time ever, a Bay agreement that took into account the climate change, and the various states had targets of nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that had to be achieved in order to maintain the living resources and the water quality of Chesapeake Bay. And we work with the states, so we work with the states. That's how we did it in phase 6. That was 2020 for that climate change decision. First time ever. Now we're moving to phase 7. And in a couple of years, we'll be rolling out this new stool and better monitoring, better modeling with more detail. The Severn River, for example, did have in phase 6 had 8 model segments of the watershed. Now we have more than 100. In the Severn River, we had 10. Now we're going to have 30. So with that greater detail, I'm hoping, as a member of the Severn River Association and as a resident on its shores, I'm hoping that not only in our next phase, phase 7, we're working with the states in terms of states ask, what are my loads? What am I responsible for? What do I have to do to clean it up? But I hope we work with organizations like the Severn River Association in terms of what do we do in terms of our loads from stormwater management or stormwater was wasn't happening? Or what would happen if our oysters increased by tenfold? What would be the scenario outcomes? So stay tuned. We are getting to a place where, you know, the action is a good work that Severn River Association and many associations and local groups throughout the watershed is taking the steps to, this is my embayment cleaned up. So we want to be able to look forward to the time when we can work more closely with you.
Thank you, Lou. Just a couple thoughts in conclusion. I've been involved in conservation in my watershed for more than 20 years. And you know, when I was first there, the Anacostia was in rough shape. But not only are people coming back, but the critters are back. River otter, eagles all over the place. You know, it was a big deal when there was George and Martha, remember those two eagles that were at the Wilson Bridge, but now there's so many eagles everywhere. Just the critters are coming back, and that's the best validation. And then, you know, finally, you know, all of us on Team Environment or Team Chesapeake are stepping up in different ways, learning from past mistakes and things that didn't work out quite the way, but a lot of things have been successful. And a lot of it is because of folks like you, whatever role that you've had. I know the association here had very humble beginnings from people unpaid, volunteering, working and growing. Now your staff, you know, all that stuff matters and makes a difference. But it's happening throughout the watershed. I have the privilege of traveling a lot throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed and the Mid-Atlantic. And there's groups like this everywhere. Groups like this everywhere, stepping up, figuring things out, leaning in, finding money. So it's no surprise to me that UMC's University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences gave the Chesapeake its highest report card grade in 22 years this year. C+. In high school, I would have been thrilled with the C+. But in Bay World, that represents progress. And a lot of that progress came from the upstream watershed that's come from Pennsylvania. You know, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens with all of us doing our part to the best of our abilities on Team Chesapeake. But I'm grateful for the time. I'm grateful for what you've done. I'm grateful for you, Don. You've just been such a leader and, you know, following your leadership and taking up the mantle. Just thank you for all that you've done. Your EPA is doing the best that we can to continue to accelerate progress. But thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Brian.
I do want to allow for some questions and answers, but if I may, I'll jump in with one from Zoom, and that might actually be best for Lou. It was when you were talking about the Pennsylvania agriculture, you know, work and the funding and everything that's been allocated. Question was, what is EPA doing from a monitoring perspective to assess the impact of those measures? Is it nitrogen, you know, monitoring? Is EPA doing it, or are they amalgamating the efforts of lots of others, or both? What does that look like?
Sure. I just want to be clear, all the hard questions go to Lucinda or Lou.
Yeah, in case the Zoom needs the mic. You know, monitoring is such a big tent in the Bay program. We have monitoring that's been long established at monitoring stations throughout the Bay. And then not that long ago, in monitoring time, a little more than a decade ago, we had shallow water monitoring where we had continuous monitors of chlorophyll and dissolved oxygen and measures of constant what's happening in the shallow water. And most recently, more buoys right in the center of the Bay that also are continuous monitoring buoys. We are learning a lot with our monitoring, but this comes from many different sources. It comes from the monitoring, of course, the local monitoring that's done by the Severn River Association. It's by longstanding monitoring by Maryland and Virginia in the Tidal Bay. It's USGS and state monitoring throughout the watershed. And NOAA has a role in some of these continuous monitors. So there are There are many in the monitoring, 10 it is. I'm just surprised. I would think you would dip a bucket of water and you would find out what's in it, but no, I mean, it is a constantly evolving science of monitoring as we get continuous monitors and they're able to learn more.
So before we go to like formal and informal Q&A, I wanted to, while we have a captive audience, just plug our next speaker series, 4 weeks from tonight, right here in River City, Cafe Mez. It'll be Ned Tillman, who we've tried to book before. He's a local environmental author. He's written books called The Big Melt, Saving Places We Love, and Chesapeake Watershed. That will be 7 o'clock on Monday, October 14th. And feel free to come early and have dinner in the restaurant or stay late and watch Monday Night Football in the lounge with me and Jesse. And then Jesse's gonna say something. a couple
Yeah,
minutes, and then
so-
we'll go back to Q&A.
So one thing I want to recognize Senator Don Guile for coming to join us tonight. And also, Lynn, Lynn has a former SRA president, wanted to show us some pretty picture. I'm not really clear on the details.
Okay. This is a,
Stand in front of the camera.
this is a aerial photo of, the upper part of the Severn. So Severn Run comes.
Would you like me to hold it for you?
This is Severn Run,
Here, I can.
right there. And this is Ben Oaks, this is Point Field Landing. Cliff used to live right there. And the guy who bought this house gave this to me about 2 years ago. And the reason was, we were doing a sort of a marsh restoration project. It was full of Phragmites. Phragmites is 8 feet to 10 feet tall, nice full flowers on top, sometimes in the fall. We were working with a senior botanist at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So what we did was cut down the Phragmites, cover with plastic, about 3 millimeter plastic for 2 years. And then we've gone back and collected or cut all the frag that wanted to come up. We removed the plastic, we had boardwalks through there so we could walk on it. And the story I got Saturday was that we're 99.999% done. After 5 years. And we're still gonna have to collect the little frag that comes up, but it's really not difficult anymore. And so I thought it was time to give this picture to the SRA.
Thank you. Do you know when this is from? And I'm gonna make it a little more visible for our friends on
It's
Zoom.
before Point Field Landing was developed, right before. So I think that's still, you can see Veterans Highway 97 is really
Yeah,
just a little thing here.
excellent.
That-
Thank
that's
you.
Before 97.
We'll have it in the office for folks that want a throwback Thursday.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
We have time for a few more questions before we wrap up.
I have lots of questions. One, what kind of modeling are you using? I mean, obviously, there's tons of different models, and that could be a long answer. You're more than welcome to call me, give me a little bit longer of an answer. But we've all seen hurricanes come up and they do the spaghetti model. The spaghetti model obviously is wrong 90% of the time. So that was one thing I had for you. So if you had a brief answer or wanted to answer me later after the meeting.
And impossible task. What models do we use and make it a brief answer? We haven't.
Smaller, you know,
we-
for the meeting.
We need to model the airshed, and that's, that model is called CMAC. It's used nationally, actually internationally. We need to model future land use, and that's a land use model that our GIS team put together. We need to model the watershed, and that is mostly a watershed model called HSPF. And then we need to model the bay, and the bay is an internationally used model called SCISM, and uses a water quality model called ICM. So each one of those is a separate lecture. So I think for the short answer, I better stop here.
Thank you. One of my other questions for Mr. EPA is, I've noticed you mentioned, waste treatment plants, twice during this, and in this report, it's not mentioned. Now, the wastewater treatment plant just from Baltimore dumps 330 million gallons of raw sewage into the river annually. That causes taxpayers lots of money, and that would be something that, you know, it's cheaper for them to continue to pay the fines. At one point, the EPA took over this. And now they're just monitoring it, but I am a waterman. I'm on the water every day. I'm not this year, but there's raw sewage floating on it, tampons, condoms, anything that goes down the drain, feces, and it's just unbelievably disgusting. And I say this with all love for the water, because I've been on the water my almost my entire life, but I've also almost lost my finger 3 times in my life due to Vibrio and other things, bacteria. Why can't we just fix it? I mean, we're not. It's cheaper to make the fines than it is to make them actually do the work. So they just pay the fines, and it continues to dump. There's a CAD program, which he's more involved in, that's getting ready done, but they're doing samples from before the bridge. And we're already getting, I'm getting a little off here, but I'm a little frustrated because, you know, the EPA has already approved the new bridge for the Key Bridge before the final decision of how it was going to be built was done. So, you know, now it's going to be longer, higher, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. It's not going to be the same bridge as what they approved, as you know, and now it's completely different. So why aren't we actually stopping these projects? Dredging in Virginia, for example, for Maryland blue crabs, like I said, I'm a water farmer, so that, you know, now they're talking about dredging for blue crabs again in Virginia. Well, that's just tearing up the bottom, seagrass, stirring up the sediment. I mean, all these things are things that could be just easily, in my opinion, be taken care of. I mean, almost every wastewater treatment plant up and down Chesapeake Bay overflows. And the stormwater, and as you were talking about, it's also, we don't find anybody anymore. We're talking about grants, we're talking about money spent for this, and we're talking about money for that. But we're not talking about the people that are putting the trash on the ground. You walk through Baltimore, needles everywhere. They say it's safe to swim. I wouldn't swim in it. I didn't even work in it this year. There's so much more I could sit here, whether you want to do it now or privately.
You don't want to do now.
Can you respond?
But
Any of
yeah,
them, yeah.
but I mean, you know, I've been talking with delegates and senators and different people, and it's just, it seems to be, we're blaming all the chickens, but nothing on the wastewater treatment plant with very little mention.
What's your name, sir?
My name is Raymond Henn. I own Legacy Crabs.
Okay, nice to meet you. Thank you for feeding us, by the way, as a water farmer. So
Actually, I don't, I do all my crabs out of state now.
okay. I'll talk about Baltimore. I think you're talking about the Back River facility. That was the one that essentially failed 2.5 years ago. I'm gonna do my best to give a concise answer, but there's a lot there. When we learned that the facility was failing, and I got a call from Secretary Ben Grumbles one morning. He said that the facility had failed and that it was dumping raw sewage directly into Back River. He and his proposal, so EPA delegates its authority on many things to the state. So the state's on the first line to make sure that the laws are carried out. And Maryland is the first line on wastewater treatment plants. They have trouble, or if there's a problem, they escalate to us. We keep an eye on things. I'll circle back on that in a minute. So he called me and he said, this has failed. I want us to take over the plant because the city of Baltimore cannot operate it effectively. After a 10-second conversation, I said, yes, please proceed. Our lawyers worked together and we took over the facility. We brought in a new operator, the Maryland Environmental Service, and had third-party verification that the systems were coming back up. And within, don't quote me, but I think it was 4 months, the facility was compliant again, and the effluent limits, so what comes out of the back end was clean, was back to where it needed to be. You might also be talking about the combined sewer overflow issue, which is a different issue, but related. And that's when old systems get overwhelmed with water, and basically the street sewer system with all the garbage and litter and all that stuff becomes overwhelmed and flushes out. That's a longer term issue that we're working on a city by city basis. The District of Columbia recently, or is still completing, but has substantially completed the elimination of the CSO system by building a different tunnel that sends everything to the wastewater treatment plant. That was about a $900 million project 10 years ago. This EPA is pushing all the cities, including Baltimore, Philadelphia, which is worse. Their system's older and bigger, to have what's called long-term control plans that include moving faster to a pipe that sends everything to the wastewater treatment plant. The hard thing is that what we end up doing often is fighting with the cities because they're meeting their legal limits, even though there are these overflow, it depends on how many. But if they have only a certain number of overflows, it's still legal. I know that sucks.
Now, who makes that law? The state or the federal government or the EPA?
Congress and the rules that we have to carry out. But we can aggressively push them to have faster timelines. And now that we have infrastructure funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law, we can help them pay for it. But that's like right where the fight is. And we're in pretty tough negotiations with almost every major city except for DC, because they're the only one in our region that has successfully changed over. But it's really expensive. It's building tunnels underneath all these major old cities. There's utilities down there. A lot of the old pipes aren't even mapped. People don't even know where the sewers are because they were built in 1880 or something, so I hear your issue. On the fines thing, we are not shy about fines. I assure you that. So we have fined Harrisburg, Scranton, Baltimore, and probably a dozen others just in the time that I've been around. But I'm happy to talk to you more offline. These are big old systems.
Oh, I understand that
Yeah,
completely,
so,
and
but I get it.
just I noticed it wasn't in the report.
They're working. Overall, wastewater is the best performing sector in the last 30 years. They're the ones that we've been able to control the best, but there are these high profile failures from time to time. Also, I'll just be straightforward. I want to make sure that the failure at Back River doesn't happen again, because we've had concerns about the city and the Department of Public Works operation and staffing of the facility. So we've done a deeper dive with the state of Maryland to make sure that they're properly staffed and that their maintenance is done. So one of the things, not to talk your ear off, but one of the things that we learned, instead of getting that call from Secretary Grumbles after the failure, I was like, what do we have to do to know before the failure occurs? And the issue is there, in the case of Back River, and most failures, It's that there's these little operations that get neglected over time, like any other maintenance, PM. Doesn't get done, doesn't get staffed, just things are not completed. So you have this part of the system failing, which leads to this system failing. Boom, 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 and before you know it.
We get a rain, it overflows.
Right, so now what we've done with all states in the Mid-Atlantic is they have to also do quality assurance audits of the maintenance. So these canaries in the coal mine we know about sooner. So that was more than you bargained for, and I'm happy to talk to you more, but
Yeah.
I
would
totally
love
get
to.
it.
I have tons of questions for you because,
It's good, man.
I'm working with other local delegates and things that work up kind of window and
Yeah,
trying to get this resolved. Because I know the seagrass levels are, from my point of view, I'm not a scientist. But I don't see them the way they used to be. They used to be all over the trout line. And you'd have to dig it off of there to be able to continue to run. I don't see that anymore. I don't see the ospreys I used to see 5 years ago. And these are just personal.
Yeah.
Noticings. And of course, we had, I can't find, which is probably something, I would like to ask now. I can't find anywhere with the EPA or the state what actually got spilled in the water from the Dolly. Whether there was batteries, I mean, we know there was gas in the trucks and things like that. But I can't find a report on it. Is there a place I can look that I haven't tried? Because I've been trying.
sure. Yeah, so the Coast Guard was the lead. So everything went through their command. We were part of that team and part of the monitoring with MDE. I can find out if the report is public or not, but if it's not, I'm happy to share it with you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, the short answer is that there was a breach. It was, don't quote me, but it was soaps and perfumes and there was no real bad stuff, but we can give you the report and you can see for yourself, but it was fairly contained in what was breached. Wasn't as hazardous as say East Palestine.
Okay.
And-
Sorry. One other question was, the building of the bridge. Is that being reevaluated by the EPA for the new bridge? Because it was approved and then the bridge designs from what they thought it was going to be has changed. So is that going to be reevaluated?
Thankfully, the bridge is not my lane, or EPA's lane, pun intended. Yeah, that's the state and Department of Transportation and others, but I'm happy to find the right contact and put you in touch.
Please do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your questions.
Richard, I stand up for one. I really loved your story of getting out of the job, went to Pennsylvania, that's what the problem was. Started working with folks. I love the story about how you all worked to get them to spend money on federal cash. Turned out great. And now they're going to spend their own. My question is a scale question.
Yeah.
Is 50 million for the rest of our life going to make a difference? Or is it a $300 million problem? And if we're going to be able to see, how much is enough we will change the trajectory so that we're going to see positive effects? Or is it a $5 billion problem we just have to wait on?
That's the legit question. And the short answer is no, 50 million is not enough. But it's a foothold. Yeah. I think the estimate, Don, you can help me out, or Lou, it's $400 million problem. Yeah, I'm saying this a lot. Don't quote me, but there's a lot of numbers I just don't recall. But no, the scale thing is in my opinion, it's the biggest challenge in all the Bay stuff, whether it's stormwater or agriculture. It's science, but it's not rocket science. It's about just doing enough practices in enough places strategically. So yeah, you're asking the right question.
The theory with the farmers, once you give them cash once, that's a gift that keeps them living. You just have to use the cash from somebody else. Give to enough farmers and have them actually adopt the practice.
Yeah, so the next layer with them, so I also want to say that the leaders who passed that who got the $50 million, they will say this is not enough money. But they are also, they said this is something to start where there wasn't anything before. This is our skin in the game. So everybody knows. In the meantime, what we're doing, thanks to better monitoring and better mapping, is that, a practice in this farm may not be as effective as a practice on this farm. Proximity to watersheds, the type of operation. So it's like what I call surgical, can be more surgical about where the money goes. So that's another challenge. It's a scale thing, but it's also a lot of these practices are voluntary. So if you as a farmer, you're like, oh, I want to be a conservationist, I want to help. That's great. That's where the money tends to flow to, but your farm may not be the highest impact farm. So that's the next level of what we're working on, thanks to the data that we have. But great questions, spot on.
Okay, maybe one more. Before they kick us out of here.
Only one more?
Probably not for you, but maybe for one of you guys. The legislature is coming up in January. Is there anything we should be doing to encourage someone to introduce something that would help you all? Or having our friends support a particular bill that you're introducing?
Okay, yeah, so the question was, with the upcoming state legislative session, are there any bills that could use a grassroots bump, if I can characterize that right? Yeah, there will be. I think that we'll have a much clearer picture of what they are after a meeting of a coalition group that we're part of called Citizens Campaign for Environment, which is coming up. I have to check my calendar, but in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start nominating priority bills for the upcoming session in November. But those conversations have already started, and many of them are water-oriented bills that come back to the center a lot more than some of the others that might be more related to air.
And how will we, ordinary citizens, know what to do?
Well, when those nominations come out, we put out word about it through all of our channels, social media, newsletter, emails, stuff like that. So if you're plugged in with SRA, you'll hear about it through us. And there are other organizations that will also be putting out that kind of information. Yeah.
I'll just say that Maryland has had recently an excellent legislative year for the Bay. Senator Elfreth and others passed the whole Watershed Act, which provides this sort of strategy, precision, and kind of a lot of these best practices and kind of and focusing on places in a thoughtful way. So, Maryland has been leading the way, but I welcome any additions or anything else that we may have missed on what's happening in General Assembly.
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think that there's not only following what SRA shares, but there's lots of other great organizations that have a lobbying arm, because the SRA obviously is a nonprofit, is limited on what they can do for lobbying. So like Maryland LTV and others, if you want to stay in touch, and not to plug any other environmental organizations other than the good work that SRA is doing. They're doing excellent work. But if you want to follow some of those that are kind of overarching legislative actions, I think that there are, in addition to Maryland LTV and Sierra Club and others, that have also a lobbying arm that they can take those actions with their funds. I think those are other groups to follow, but I think that's where I will probably share those. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, well,
I ask a half question. Oh, sure. Don't dig deep, but kind of broad stroke, like this is where or what is the biggest disconnect between upstreamers and downstreamers in this kind of like it's a big deal, and I don't want to say it's Maryland versus Pennsylvania, but like upstream versus downstream, like the region, the people, the area, like what and where is the big disconnect?
I would argue there's one of the eye openers for me is that there's not much of a disconnect. People love their local water body. They love the Conestoga, they love the for Susquehanna. They love whatever they know it, they love it, just like you love the Severn or people love the South River or whatever. So, and the Chesapeake. So the disconnect is that there's a water-focused political culture here on a common asset. In Pennsylvania, it's different because there's different watersheds, there's different clusters politically, it's just more complex. What doesn't help though is Chesapeake in, up near the New York border. So the language many of us have been using is local watersheds, or, to know what watershed we're in when we're up there, and we talk about that. And we have the Trout Unlimited, or, whatever, some local, outdoors group speak to it. So there's not that much of a disconnect. Yeah, and I just want to impress on Marylanders. I've been nothing but moved by how thoughtful people in Pennsylvania are. Every sector, they get it. They just don't always have the support because there's not a Bay caucus, up there in the same way. So that's why, one of my favorite things, and my poor team hears me say it, it's like engage. I'm like, engage. You don't get it, engage with them. You're upset with them, engage with them. They're not stepping up, engage with them. Like, sit down, figure it out, go to them, go to their table and like, hey, what's going on? How can we work together? And I've just found that whether it's with the Amish or Hershey or the Farm Bureau or whoever, it's been reciprocated the interest. So I'd also encourage all of you to talk to your advocacy groups that are not just this local watershed, to spend time in Pennsylvania, and it's something I've talked to the CBF about and others. We have to sort of bridge these divides and build a constituency up there. But no, it's been it's been a real eye opener for me, for sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Really appreciate it.